And when the public says, including Republicans, we don't believe Trump and the Justice Department and what they're saying about Jeffrey Epstein, it's not just about Jeffrey Epstein, it's about the loss of trust that the Trump administration had. Once that trust is gone, it is extremely difficult to get back.
So recently, Glenn Greenwald had a podcast about how Trump's latest story regarding the Epstein narrative is a total tall tale. It's bogus. He's actually saying that essentially the Epstein files, or the idea of the Epstein files, is a product of the Democrats. It's a hoax on par with the Russiagate hoax. So, this seems absurd, but I want to see what Glenn has to say about it. He's been covering this story from the start, so let's get his take on it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
We've been covering on a essentially nightly basis the evolution of the Trump administration's extremely controversial treatment of the Epstein files, which was central to the discourse of right-wing and MAGA politics over the last 4 years. And the Trump administration, shocked and angered, especially their own followers, when out of the blue, they sent a memo to Axios, of all places, announcing that the DOJ and FBI had concluded their investigation. There was nothing here to see at all. They were closing the investigation and they would release no further documents, meaning they wouldn't have released a single document, not even one token one, that wasn't previously available. And we reported on and showed you the video where Trump at the White House, when asked about the one issue they've never addressed, which is Epstein working with a foreign intelligence agency. They asked it to Pam Bondi, and before she could answer, he wouldn't let her answer. He interjected and said, "How dare you talk about something so trivial? Move on. We have way more important things to talk about than some weird creep who died 5 years ago." Oh yeah, this is totally irrelevant. But his most prominent supporters, and huge millions of them, were feeding for the last 4 years on the claim that this was not just relevant and important, but essential to understanding the rot at the heart of the globalist order, and that the Biden administration had in its possession enormous amounts of documents extremely incriminating about many of the world's most powerful people that they were concealing.
Yeah, Glenn's right about this. In some ways, I think in the past, Glenn has referred to the idea of the Epstein files, or divulging them to the public, was something like a Rosetta Stone to decipher the evils of the deep state. And that's exactly how it was portrayed by many people on the right, including people in this administration. Kash Patel and Dan Bongino and Pam Bondi all talked about the lack of transparency of the Biden administration. But I have to say, it's very heartwarming to see, some of the best people in my mind on the populist right really push back against this narrative, this tale that they're trying to sell us now, that, the Epstein files was the product of Comey and Obama and Biden, as if Biden could have thought of anything to this extent at that point. His mind wasn't even in that headspace. Obama hadn't even taken office. That was actually Trump administration that began the Epstein investigation in 2019 and 2018, actually. So it's just ludicrous. But again, some of the best people on the right are standing against this, like Steve Bannon and Candace Owens and Matt Walsh, and and Tucker Carlson, that have serious problems with this narrative. And although many are not willing to say, Trump's complicit in this cover-up and go to that level, which I am, he's complicit in this cover-up, they're at least willing to say that this doesn't make sense and you have to tell the truth. It's actually the neocon never-Trumpers on the right that are saying, there's nothing to see here, move on, you're a conspiracy theorist if you want to talk about his connections to Israel and stuff like that.
To protect the world's most powerful predators. And Trump officials who now run the FBI and DOJ and other agencies came into office campaigning on a promise, as did J.D. Vance and even Donald Trump, to finally bring transparency to this. And so to just tell them all of a sudden, oh, this thing that you've been talking about for 4 years that your most trusted pundits and journalists have been telling you is so vital, that we've been saying is so vital. J.D. Vance made a huge deal out of it. Donald Trump Jr. did. Dan Bongino, Kash Patel, Pam Bondi. Long list. Everything they've been telling you about how crucial this is, the documents are so incriminating, the Biden administration is disgracefully hiding it. Never mind. Forget all that. This is not even relevant. Who cares about Jeffrey Epstein? People other than the most drooling, subservient partisan supporters of Trump are not going to accept that, and they haven't.
Yeah, they haven't, and that's the breath of fresh air that I have, and really it's kind of contradictory to kind of the notion that all of MAGA is a cult, which I always thought was a little foolish. I can't deny that some of his most diehard zealous supporters do try to explain everything away like it's unmanifested genius and 4D chess, and I have seen that in some regard in regard to this. But some of the best people, again, are pushing back, and that is a good thing to witness. And Glenn is right. From that first conference forward, that press conference, Trump responded in such a defensive way as to make it seem like he had something to hide. Like, I can't believe you're asking a question about Epstein after 24 hours after the DOJ and FBI release, which I believe was on a Sunday that was released, and then he was responding to it, I believe, on Monday. Of course they're going to ask questions about it. Pam Bondi spinning this whole thing in 4 different directions, saying, hey, she wasn't talking about the client list on her desk, only the actual files. And I don't know if he has any connections to intelligence. I'll get back to you on that. But that's it on Epstein. She closed the door there after implying that she might get back to us on it. I don't think she's going to get back to us on it. But they were dismissive from the start.
And as a result, Trump keeps having to go back to it, even though he said, I'm not talking about this anymore. Don't ask me about it. It's too insignificant. His base is riled up over this. It's become a very significant controversy, arguably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, of the Trump administration thus far. And it's kind of a Frankenstein that they created by spending so many years banging the table saying only corrupt protectors of pedophiles like the Biden officials would hide these documents. And now they're hiding them, even denying in some senses that they exist. And so Trump has repeatedly gone back. He keeps making it worse. And now he has spun this incredibly nonsensical conspiracy theory that it's the Democrats who created the Epstein files, who forged them, who fabricated them. And that as a result, he says, anybody demanding release of the Epstein files, something that he promised to do, that J.D. Vance promised to do, that all these people promised to do, that anyone demanding that is a selfish person playing into the hands of the radical left by demanding the disclosure of documents that he says were faked, like the Russiagate investigation was, by all these Democrats.
Yeah, and that's exactly the narrative they're going with now, that essentially this thing that the right clamored for over years and years and years is now a product of the left. And he's right about the Russiagate hoax. That was bogus. Same with their, the deep state's concerted effort to conceal the information about the Hunter Biden laptop. That was duplicitous and corrupt as bleep, for sure, too. But, this, of all things, is not that. And it wasn't the product of them talking about it. Yes, multiple administrations investigated this, but to say that they don't exist, what are you trying to say? That there wasn't an investigation that in the past you claimed that you cooperated with? And all indications are that Trump did cooperate with the investigation of Epstein. Trump was friends with Epstein, especially in the 90s leading up to 2004, where they had a property dispute and a bidding war over a particular property in Florida. But what are you trying to say now? And it just contradicts it, too, when 2 days ago we heard, there's nothing there. They talked about that in the press conference. They said, hey, there's nothing there. There's no evidence he was involved in blackmail. There are no clients, etc. And then yesterday he's going back on that and said, hey, I told Bondi she could release whatever she thought was ironclad and substantial. But which one is it? Those two things contradict. Is there nothing there, or is there and you just don't want to release it? I don't think we're going to see the answer to this.
Clearly eager to convince the public, you don't need to see these documents, and even if you did, the things in them, don't believe them, they're fake. Why would Trump be so incentivized to convince the public that the information contained in the Epstein files, which first the Trump administration summarily announced they were going to conceal, why would he be so interested in convincing them that they're fake? What's in those documents that he wants the public to disbelieve? Here he is speaking outside the White House, standing next to his press secretary, Carolyn Leavitt, earlier today.
On Epstein, the Attorney General briefed you on the DOJ and FBI review, the findings of that review. The Attorney General briefed you on
what? On the
DOJ and FBI
on what?
review.
On what subject?
Epstein. on Epstein, of the review of the files. Attorney General Pam Bondi
A very,
on that.
very quick briefing.
Did she tell you, what did she tell you about the review? And specifically, did she tell you her name appeared in the file?
No, she's...
So the question was, in case you didn't hear, there were a lot of noises going on. It's outside the White House. Did Pam Bondi give you a briefing on what's in these documents, and did she happen to mention whether your name appears in any of the documents? And here's what Trump said.
No, she's given us just a very quick briefing, and in terms of the credibility of the different things that they've seen. And I would say that, these files were made up by Comey, they were made up by Obama, they were made up by the Biden, and we went through years of that with the Russia hoax, with all of the different things that we had to go through. We've gone through years of it, but she's handled it very well, and it's going to be up to her. Whatever she thinks is credible, she should release. Yeah.
This isn't about face. That whatever she thinks she is credible should be released. And a few days ago, they said that's it on Epstein. So they are reversing to some extent here. Do I think they'll actually provide what people are looking for? No, I don't. But Trump has felt the backlash from this, clearly.
Now, that is a little bit of a shift rhetorically, because the FBI and DOJ's announcement originally was, we're closing the investigation, there's no further disclosures. And when Trump was asked about it at the White House, he said, this is just, leave me alone, I don't want to hear about this, this is too irrelevant. Pam Bondi answered the question about whether Epstein worked for a foreign intelligence agency by saying, I don't know. I have no knowledge of that. I never thought about that before. We'll get back to you.
The fact that they're even trying to sell the fact that they never even paid attention to that angle whatsoever is absurd. She knows one way or the other what exists on those relationships. I've covered them in other videos. He had many connections to the Israeli government. Top officials, including Ehud Barak, who stayed at his property for prolonged periods of time, visited him 30 times after his conviction, his first sexual offense conviction, where he got a sweetheart deal. His connections to Les Wexner, who he got his property from, his $77 million mansion. And, he also knew Robert Maxwell, the most famous spy in Israel. That was Ghislaine Maxwell's father. So, yeah, there's plenty of connections there that they wouldn't have explored that, and no one was interested in that. And they're not going to get back to us, I don't think, on that one either, if at all.
Now he's saying she's going to release credible information, which means that there's some documents that Trump regards as non-credible, faked by Obama. And when did, by the way, Obama fake these documents? Jeffrey Epstein was arrested during the Trump administration.
Right.
The first Trump administration. And that's when he supposedly killed himself in 2018. So the origin...
It was actually 2019 where he was supposed to have killed himself, but the investigation, I believe, started in 2018. So Glenn's right. It doesn't seem like there's any way Obama was involved. He wasn't even in the administration at that time. I'd love to hear more about that, but it just seems like Trump's kind of method and strategy is to link a name that has kind of universal disdain among the right. Just put Obama in there, and the right will jump on board and be like, oh, yeah, that sounds legit. Obama was terrible. He must have been the catalyst for this. It's absurd, actually.
Of this investigation would have been under Donald Trump. How did Obama fabricate documents in the Epstein file, and to what end? If Jim Comey and John Brennan and Obama and Hillary had fabricated documents, altered these documents, inserted stuff about, I don't know, about Trump or his associates, why would they do that if they didn't release it? It only makes sense to do that if you're then going to release it and say, oh, look, here's the Epstein files. Here's Trump's name, or here's Mitch McConnell's name, or whatever. And then Trump would say, no, those are forged. Why would the Democrats forge documents and leave them there, not release them? How does that make any sense? When could they have forged them? When did Hillary and Jim Comey and Brennan have the ability to access the Epstein files?
Exactly. This, you connect the dots here and you can just see that this is spin to try to justify the concealment of the evidence that exists in that case. The link that Epstein had to associates and clients involved in this sex trafficking ring. Links to the blackmail material he is known to have had in his safe because he had CCTV cameras all around his property and a safe that was found with digital media labeled with prominent people's names on them. That was known to exist. A New York Times reporter even admitted that days after Epstein killed himself, he said, yeah, Epstein told me off the record he had lots of blackmail information on prominent people, their sexual proclivities, and their drug use history. And I'm not saying innately trust the New York Times, but again, the New York Times is an entity deeply connected with the state, an entity most likely to probably want to conceal something like this involving people in power. And even they had to spill, what has to have been at least some kind of truth in the days after he was murdered, when it wasn't really clear how far this conspiracy stretched, how many people were associated with it, and before it was politicized.
And what's the basis for this? Why is this only being claimed now? Why is Trump so eager to convince his base and the public, look, there's documents in there that you don't need to see? Not the ones about Epstein having sex with kids on video or the child pornography they say he downloaded. Nobody wants to see that. Nobody cares about that. Nobody's asking for that. And this isn't something that Trump just came up with today. This is clearly a conspiracy theory he's decided to disseminate. Here on True Social, after he told everybody to move on, not talk about it anymore, and his supporters continued to do it anyway for the reasons I said, he went on True Social and said this, quote, "What's going on with my boys, and in some cases gals? They're all going after Attorney General Pam Bondi, who's doing a fantastic job. We're all on one team, MAGA, and I don't like what's happening. We have a perfect administration, the talk of the world, and selfish people are trying to hurt it all over a guy who never dies, Jeffrey Epstein. For years, it's Epstein over and over again." So he called the people who are asking for disclosure of the Epstein files selfish. And then this is what he said. You see the part in blue right here. This is amazing. This is that same conspiracy theory that he enunciated today. "Why are we giving publicity to files written by Obama, crooked Hillary, Comey, Brennan, and the losers and criminals of the Biden administration, who conned the world with the Russia hoax, 51 intelligence agents, the laptop from hell, and more? They created the Epstein files. Just like they created the fake Hillary Clinton, Christopher Steele dossier that they used on me, and now my so-called friends are playing right into their hands."
Yeah, okay, so first of all, how's this selfish? It seems more selfish for someone in power to conceal this after campaigning on its release. And I agree, I'll give the Trump supporters this. Trump himself was not the major campaigner to release the Epstein files. It was people underneath him that, by the way, he exercised judgment in appointing them to prominent positions, like the head of the FBI, the Attorney General, the deputy of the FBI. That's Trump's buck stopping there. The buck stops with Trump regardless. And yeah, I'm sorry, they created the Epstein files, but we're told that there's not much there to release. Kash Patel on Joe Rogan's show said essentially, do you think I wouldn't release something? It's just not there. I can't release what isn't there. But he's saying that there are Epstein files, but now they're a creation of the Democrats. I'm sorry, no. Right-wingers talked about this endlessly on their podcast, getting to the bottom of this and promising that Trump would be the one to provide transparency in that regard.
Now, is anyone who's a Trump supporter going to believe this? That after spending 4 years saying the Epstein files hold the key to everything, accusing the Biden administration of protecting pedophiles by refusing to release it, they're now going to believe that, these documents were written by, he says the files were, they created the Epstein files, meaning Hillary and Obama. Does anyone believe this? Trump seems very eager to me to say, we're not going to release certain files because some of it contains information that's false. What information is that he's so eager to convince Americans were fabricated by Obama and Hillary and Biden?
And Trump, if you are a man of the people, if you have confidence in the support of your base, why don't you release that material and let us make that judgment? Let us make that judgment, and even your supporters, in determining how culpable you might have been in this whole thing. Wouldn't they be able to easily dispose of nonsense like they did in the Russiagate hoax that your supporters did back you on? And people even like Massey backed you on, despite the fact you dragged him over the CR and the big, beautiful, abominable bill, actually. That's the kind of loyalty you repay. But I think if your supporters are in the right and you love your supporters, you should believe that they would come to the right conclusion if you provided these docs to see whether they're credible or not, whether they are the product of a corrupt democratic machine that was trying to undermine you. That part is true. The Russiagate part is true. The hoax, the Jan 6 narrative, they threw everything at this to try to take him down, but they didn't throw the Epstein files at him. They didn't throw the Epstein thing at him, and I think that can be explained because all sides are complicit in this giant operation, this abomination run by Epstein and Maxwell, by the way. But it wasn't the product of the left. It wasn't the product of the Democrats. The investigation began under your first term.
That didn't come from nowhere. He's very interested in making sure that people believe that. I don't think he's going to get very far. Here's the first polling data on what Trump is doing with Epstein. It's from Morning Consult, and it came out today, and the headline is Few Americans Trust the DOJ's Conclusions on Jeffrey Epstein. And then here you see the two questions they asked. The percentage of voters who believe the Justice Department is being honest and transparent by saying, first, there's no evidence of a client list or blackmail scheme involving Epstein and prominent people. And here you see in blue, this is the percentage of Americans who believe the Justice Department's claim on that. Only 25% of voters overall. And amazingly, the group that most believes what the Justice Department says, there's no client list, there's no evidence of blackmail, are Republicans. If you had taken this poll a year earlier, 6 months earlier, Republicans were the ones saying, no, there's huge amounts of incriminating evidence there that the Biden administration is hiding. Now suddenly, it's Republicans who believe the Justice Department's claim. But note, this is the no, the pink here. More Republicans disbelieve the Justice Department than believe it.
Yeah, that is striking. And, I have a dissident audience, an audience of dissidents on the right and left, probably more so on the right than the left. And I posted a poll saying, what do you think Trump's biggest blunder is by far? And I listed these choices: rearming Ukraine, bombing Iran, the big beautiful bill, and the Epstein cover-up. And guess which choice got 72% of the vote for being Trump's biggest blunder? It's the Epstein cover-up. And I'm not Trump's audience. I don't have the same sample size that they're dealing with in these polls. But I can tell you, dissidents do care about this. And dissidents on the right, many of which supported Trump and voted for Trump partially because of this, do have a serious issue with this. And again, it's some of the most prominent people from that side too. The Candace Owens and Steve Bannons and Matt Walsh's and Tucker Carlson's of the world.
There's a Trump Justice Department, and 41% of Republicans say they don't believe the Justice Department when they say there's no evidence of a client list or blackmail scheme involving Epstein and prominent people. Only 35% believe it. But look at independents. 54% of independents say they do not believe the Justice Department is being honest. Only 18% say they believe the Trump Justice Department. And Democrats, 60% say they don't believe the Trump Justice Department. Only 20% say they believe the Trump Justice Department. And overall, the breakdown is 51% of all Americans say no, they don't believe the Trump administration's claims about this, and only 25% believe it.
Notice the disconnect from the Democratic reaction, too, to how they're behaving, the prominent Democrats in power and representatives, most of which are not touching this issue at all to try to slam him on. Some of them are. Ro Khanna is. He's, pushing for legislation that will divulge the Epstein files. But very few prominent leaders in the Democratic Party are really hammering this home. And this would be the ultimate weapon, the ultimate bludgeon you have against Trump right now. But they didn't even use it during Trump's first term either, despite his close associations with Epstein in the 90s. And I think there's a clear reason for that. Their side's implicated too. Not every single politician, but certainly prominent Republicans and prominent Democrats. And I think that's why both sides are reluctant to release this, because I said this in a different video, because I think the most plausible scenario is what is contained in those files, in those classified pieces of information, is enough to start a war or a revolution, and that explains why both sides can never let it be released. They just have no incentive to release it.
They asked the same question, do you trust the Justice Department when they say that Epstein committed suicide in prison? in 2019 while awaiting trial on sex trafficking charges. Again, it's Republicans who now, amazingly, it's Republicans who most believe that Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide. 40% of them believe the Justice Department is being honest about that. Only 37% believe they're not. But overall, 35% of voters believe when the Justice Department says Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. 42% believe they're not being honest. So you see already a lot of Republicans have shifted to the point where Republicans are now the ones who are most dismissive of the Epstein files. Nothing to see, he killed himself, move on. But still, huge numbers of people do not believe the Justice Department on this.
Yeah, the shift is palpable, and this happens all the time. It's part of a tribal instinct, a tribal impulse. But again, this is not uniform on the right. You just look at Twitter and you can see the reactions. They're not happy. A lot of people are saying, hey, I'm done with Trump. My comments are full of that, by the way. People that supported Trump because, they did believe he was better than Harris. And they, ultimately bought the bullet and bit the bullet and voted for him, and now have regrets over it because of how this is being handled in particular. They said the same over the big, beautiful bill and bombing Iran and rearming Ukraine and such like that. There's so many terrible, manifestations of this Trump policy and the Trump foreign policy regime. But this is really striking at the heart of people, I think, because it really is emblematic of the whole mantra Trump used to run on, drain the swamp, when it really seems like instead of draining the swamp, you're becoming and building yourself into the biggest swamp creature imaginable to hide this up, a sex trafficking ring with victims who deserve justice and won't get it.
Why would they? They've heard for years and years and years the opposite of this. Here's data for Progress. Polling on Trump's handling of the Epstein files. Republicans who have heard a lot about the Epstein files disapprove of the Trump administration's handling of them. So of the Republicans who have heard a lot about what Trump administration is saying, huge numbers don't believe it. So here's the top list. People who say they've heard a lot about the Epstein files. And the question is, do you approve or disapprove of how the Trump administration has handled the release of these files? Only 20% of Republicans say they approve. 20% said they somewhat approve. 36% say they strongly disagree, and 19% say they somewhat disapprove. So even just among Republicans who have heard a lot about the Epstein files, 55% disapprove of how the Trump administration has handled this.
I think what's key here is to see the more that people know or have heard about the Epstein files, the more that they have issues with how this is being handled. Like, this is really crazy. If you've heard a lot, you're way, way, way more prone to having a problem with how the government's handling this. And if you've heard nothing at all, you're way less. That's saying that the informed people on this have issues with it. And there's no question about that. There's no reason to doubt that.
Compared to only 40% who approve. That's Republicans. Now, that's really bad news. Not just for this specific issue, but for the broader promise of the Trump administration that they were going to cleanse the government of what was, in fact, these frauds that the Biden administration perpetrated on Russiagate, which was really Obama, but his CIA, and lying about the Hunter Biden laptop files being Russian disinformation, about the Steele dossier, about COVID. People have come to distrust the government, and it's a major reason why they turned to Trump, who vowed to provide all this transparency, to be honest with the public about what's happening, regardless of where the chips might fall. And when the public says, including Republicans, we don't believe Trump and the Justice Department and what they're saying about Jeffrey Epstein, it's not just about Jeffrey Epstein, it's about the loss of trust that the Trump administration had about whether they would be any different or whether they would just be the same old, as the entire DC political class constantly lies and deceives and covers up.
Yeah, Trump was supposed to be the white knight of transparency, to bring light through the darkness that was the Biden administration, the cover-ups, the corruption, all this deep state madness that tried to undermine Trump. And as Glenn said, it was true. There was deep state madness to undermine Trump. Guess which part of that wasn't tried to use to undermine Trump? The Epstein files. The Democrats really wouldn't touch that issue almost at all. Very few of them piped up about it, despite the fact that Trump had a close relationship with Epstein. Not saying that I think that Trump was implicated in the crimes of Epstein. I actually tend not to think that. I don't even think they had a relationship after 2004, and his first conviction was on the basis that he had committed crimes regarding sexual offenses in 2005, I believe. And I think the conviction was in 2006. That's when he received the sweetheart deal from Alexander Acosta, who, by the way, eventually became Trump's labor secretary. And Alex Acosta said, hey, I was told he was part of intelligence and to back off. He was above my pay grade, which that's a mask drop moment. And thankfully, dissidents have paid attention to that. And it's one of the most conclusive pieces of information that lead us to believe, or many of us to believe, that Epstein had connections to intelligence services, most likely Mossad because of his personal connections, and that's just applying an Occam's razor. That's the most likely scenario. So yeah, Trump's going back on his base by doing this. It's causing a schism, and you can see how this is jeopardizing the rest of his agenda. If he thinks he's going to have, support in Congress to pass his tariff plan, his immigration plan, etc. I don't know if he can withstand that. The elected representatives are going to take too much heat, and they're not that representative of the populace in general. But this is something that could blow up his administration, clearly. I think you're already seeing it. And how he's reacting differently compared to the first press conference is indicating to me that they're at least trying to spin this differently. They can't keep on the track of Trump just saying, nothing to see here. I can't believe people are asking questions, when there's this emergency in Texas. Sorry, we don't accept that, by the way.
And once people think that about you, and this is an issue that they heard a lot about, not from the New York Times and NBC News, but from Trump world over the last 4 years. Once that trust is gone, it is extremely difficult to get back. It's like if someone in your life who you trust, you catch them lying about something really important. That trust is fractured, if not broken. It's very difficult, if not impossible, for that person to earn it back. Because you've proven you're willing to lie about something important. Why wouldn't you again? That's what's happening with the Trump administration. And the fact that Donald Trump is now resorting to this utterly insane, deranged conspiracy theory that I don't think anyone's going to believe, that it was the Democrats that created the Epstein files, as he said verbatim, and that a lot of the information there is fake and they fabricated it, leaves a lot of people wondering why Trump is suddenly so interested in convincing the public not to believe the Epstein files, even if they do one day get disclosed through whatever mechanism the public comes to learn about them.
Yeah, the only crazier thing than the Epstein story itself, the story of Epstein, how he accumulated his wealth, who his connections were, who his clients were, who he sex trafficked to, who he operated on behalf of, who he worked for. The only crazier things than that is that network, that web of the Epstein story, is this Trump narrative, this new conspiracy to try to spin this as the product of the Democrats. After, as Glenn said, it was right-wingers who talked about this endlessly, over and over throughout time, including Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, who routinely said on his podcast, and I've seen clips of it, that, hey, getting to the bottom of these files and disclosing this to the public will bury the Democrats. It'll bury their, evils, their maniacal corruption that we've seen to hide the sex trafficking ring and the information that would be divulged if Trump gets into power and there is transparency again. Well, I'm sorry, there's not transparency. A lot of Republicans don't buy it. Some of Trump's most faithful followers do. But even at Turning Point USA, you can tell that not everyone was buying this. And there's very influential people that are pushing back on this. Again, not to the point where they're saying like Trump is an instigator in this cover-up. They're using the same partisan tactic that's been used since, the English Revolution, where you can't condemn the king outright. You have to condemn the king's men and his advisors as being evil and misleading the king. You can't implicate the king. And that's what they did in the Grand Remonstrance of 1641, by the way. They said, oh, all Charles's advisors are evil and maniacal and duplicitous and scammers. But the truth was the king was a tyrant. And I think it's no different here. Trump is a tyrant, and to conceal this after all the years of uproar over the Epstein files and concealing information related to it, which are palpable. A lot of people are trying to say this, that, it should be shoved under the rug now. It's not as important as Ukraine or Iran or, the tariffs or the economy or taxes. And maybe to them that might be true, but I think there's ulterior motives for people saying that too. And they want to get away from this scandal. And that's what this has become. This has become a scandal. This is a cover-up. It's a bipartisan cover-up because the Biden administration did it too. But the Epstein files and the Epstein investigation itself were not the product of crooked Hillary and Obama. It just wasn't. This was more directed from right-wingers who ran on this issue and issues peripheral to it, like opposing the exploitation of women by having men in women's sports and things like that. So yeah, we demand answers. I don't think this story is going to go away. I think it's going to hurt Trump more than any other scandal that's broken out or any other issue that's broken out, including, bombing Yemen for a month and not having any success from that, bombing Iran, starting a war with Iran, which, by the way, it continues. There's a ceasefire, but that's going to come back up again. Netanyahu's going to say, hey, bail us out, regime change those folks because they're weeks away from acquiring a nuke. He's been doing that my whole life, basically. Rearming Ukraine, going back on his commitment to disengaging from that theater and ending that war. And the big, beautiful bill. All these issues, the schism with Musk, all of these things I don't think have a chance to jeopardize his presidency as much as this, as much as maintaining this lie, going full bore, trying to sell it to the public, and it backfiring time and time again. So I'm glad to see Glenn cover that. But let me know down below, do you agree with me or Glenn on this? Do you think this is going to jeopardize Trump's agenda? Do you think this could make him a lame duck president, affect him in the midterms, etc.? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Subscribe to Glenn too. He's awesome. Covers great stories, including this one, and he's covered this one from the start. And please consider becoming a YouTube member by clicking the join button below. If you click that button, you can support me financially, and I graciously appreciate that, but you also get something in return. If you do that, you get access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. And with that said, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. See you in the next one.